Hey, quick heads up before we get rolling. If you're building something big and need a boost, papernapkinwisdom.com has a stack of free tools ready for you. Strategy, mindset, leadership, all there, totally free. You can even hit the link in bio on social media, and let's level up.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom shared by some of the world's top entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers. Here's your host, Govind Jayaraman.
Hi, I'm Govind Jayaraman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom, episode 249, part 2 in a super special 3-part series with iconic entrepreneur John Sleeman. Now, think for a moment. Have you ever been handed something unexpected? A story, a connection, a clue from your past, and felt like it was meant just for you? In this episode, John shares a moment that stopped him in his tracks. A handwritten brewing recipe book gifted to him by an aunt he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. A recipe book from his grandfather, dating back over a century. What do you do when you've been given a gift like that? You might be wondering what legacy lies dormant in your story, too. Just waiting to be acted on, rediscovered, or even reborn. In part 2, we step deeper into the story of John Sleeman, not just the builder of a brand, but the rebuilder of a legacy. You'll hear how archives, old agreements, and long-forgotten family secrets turned into a blueprint for one of the greatest comebacks in brewing history. Let this episode and this story challenge you. Let it inspire you, and most of all, let it invite you to ask, what gift have I been given, and what will I do with it? Let's listen in. John, welcome back to Paper Napkin Wisdom.
Thank you.
Part 1 was start off with the napkin that you gave me, which was start a pub, and now we're moving to part 2, and we teased a little bit about it because your Aunt Florian comes out of the woodwork. You haven't spoken to her in 10 years, and she shows up and says, "It's been 51 years. I've been meaning to give this to somebody. You're that somebody." And what did she give you again?
Well, she gave me a gift. She gave me a recipe book that was handwritten by her dad, my grandfather. And I said, what is this? She said, well, as I mentioned in our last episode, that, we were brewers in England. We were brewers when we came to Canada. And in the 1800s, childhood mortality was pretty high. So people had lots of kids. And my grandfather was one of 10. And the family was quite successful here in Guelph. And in those days, one kid went to the ministry, and one kid went to law, and one kid went to, run some of the family businesses. And my grandfather was chosen to carry on the family brewing business. And so he needed to learn how to make beer. And while there were certainly schools in Europe and places like that, Guelph in those days was a horse and buggy kind of town. There was no place to go, no school to go to learn how to make beer. So you learned at your father's knee. And what my aunt gave me was her dad's recipe book. She said, I've been waiting 51 years to give this to somebody in the family who's got an aptitude or an interest in the beer business, and you're the only one out of all of them that's in the beer business, so here you go. And it is actually, although it says on the cover, make sure I got this in the right spot, it says record. It's actually a whole bunch of different recipes there's cream ale, there's lagers, there's all kinds of stuff in here. And she said, I'm giving you this gift. And she said, and here's an old bottle of beer from the late 1800s. There was no beer in it. It's an empty one. And I would really like you to restart the brewery. And so, yes, I was in the beer business, but I was selling other people's beer. I was importing other people's beer. I didn't know anything about making beer. And so I felt, the napkin moment is I've been given this gift. I really should do something about it. I should at least think about doing something.
And that was your paper napkin. The second paper. You've been given a gift. You better do something with it. And I'm really sort of struck by this. So you were in the beer business. You had obtained the import permit for something that didn't exist, taking these great UK beers, moving them across the country, opened up the doorway for that, shoe leather your way across the country to make sure that you wore out a bunch of shoes, but also made sure that you got the beer into pubs, figured out how to technically make that happen. Now, all of a sudden, your Aunt Florian shows up. Florian's just a perfect name for this as well, just so we're clear. So Aunt Florian shows up and says, here's a recipe book, here's a bottle. You need to go and carry on your family legacy, which you knew nothing about. And the other thing that you said, which boggles my mind, is that the Sleeman Brewing Company that your grandfather had was as big as Labatt and Molson at the time. In Carling.
It's actually very interesting because as I spent more and more time with Florian learning about the family history, she said, what you really need to do is go and spend some time at the University of Guelph going through the archives. And I said, and why would I do that? She said, because when we lost our license in 1933, the family had boxes and boxes of documents, and they were all gifted to the University of Guelph. So I spent at least hours, probably days, going through stuff. And one of the things I found was a cartel agreement, and it was dividing up, this part of Ontario between the breweries. And the agreement was, we're going to set a price that we're all going to agree to, so we don't undercut each other. And you can sell. So there was on the document, it says Labatt was able to have the London area. Now there was also Carling's brewery in the late 1800s in the London area, and they had a certain area. And there was a brewery in Kitchener-Waterloo called Kuntz, Kuntz, and so they were given, you have that area. And my grandfather and his brothers were given kind of Guelph towards, Malton, which is where the airport is. And then beyond that, Molson was starting to come into Ontario. They were primarily a Quebec brewer. And so it was a document where all the gentlemen got around, and most of their names were John Carling, John Molson, John Labatt, John Sleeman. And so all the Johns got around a table and probably over a couple of pints agreed they'd carve up the province. And here's the price. And don't do anything stupid like selling it cheaper, because then I'll have to lower my prices and, then we all suffer. So I'm going through the files at the U of G, and here's all this stuff. I found another thing, which was a bank statement from the Bank of Montreal here in Guelph. And there's another whole story about the Bank of Montreal in Guelph. And it's a bank statement, and I can't remember whether it was 1913 with $11 million or 1911 with $13 million. But either way, that's an awful lot of money. That's a lot of money now.
Sorry.
And so it was.
The year again is 1913 or 1911.
It was either.
Like, this is a lot of money back then.
Yeah. And this is before we started smuggling. We were actually paying tax on this stuff.
Wow.
And my ancestors are going, that ain't enough. Let's smuggle Al Capone. Really? Anyway, you're taking me down a different road here. So, yeah, I was given this opportunity, and Florian starts telling me about it, and I go and look through the archives, and I see stuff, and I think, I guess you're going to have to do something. But I also said, in one of those give your head a shake moments, there's some very big successful breweries. We're talking 1984, 85, 86. They're called Molson, and they're called Labatt, and Carling's was still in business, and Heineken owned a brewery called Amstel based in Hamilton. And I remember lying in bed going, are you out of your mind? what, you're going to take on, and they weren't, with the exception of Heineken, they were not multinationals. They were Canadian owned, but absolute market dominance. And why do you think you're going to compete and be successful? So I remember thinking about, this could be a stupid idea, John. You may want to reconsider. So I started coming up with things that I thought I could say to Florian that would convince her that this isn't going to work. Because I really didn't want to lose everything. I had a successful business. So I remember going to Florian and saying, Florian, it's a really interesting idea. Thank you so much for telling me all of this stuff. But if I'm going to do this, I really should get the original company back. I should get the Sleeman Brewing and Malting Company back. But somebody else owns that. So I don't think I can get it back. And she goes, well, you're going to try. I said, yeah, well, I might. And I'll never forget this. I think she sensed that she could use some moral blackmail to get me to do it. And it worked. She said, I'm not making this up. She puts her hand on her heart and goes, it didn't mean a lot to me if you try to do this before I die. I'm screwed, right?
Yeah, you're done.
So I said to her, okay, Florian, I'll find out who bought Sleeman Brewing and Malting when we lost our license. So I got the lawyers to do some research, and the company was bought by, the name of the company at the time was called Standard Brands, which eventually became part of a bigger company that we all know called Nabisco. So I said to Florian, look, I'll get in touch with the folks at Nabisco, but if they say no, we won't do this. She goes, okay. So I get in touch with the folks at Nabisco. For some reason, I phone and say, can I talk to the CEO? And they said, sure, here he is. So the CEO comes on. I forget his name now. And he said, who are you? What are you doing? And I said, I'm in the imported beer business. Here's what I import. He goes, oh, I like Guinness. So what are you doing? I told him the story about the book and Florian. But I believe you guys bought my grandfather's business. So, it would be important to me and to my aunt if we could get the company back. But I understand if you don't want to sell it to me. Pause. He goes, wow, what a great story. You can have it back for $1. Oh, crap. That wasn't part of the plan. So now I've got a bottle, a recipe book. I've got the company back, but I'm still squirming around trying not to do this. So I said to Florian, well, we got the company back, but, until we get the trademark, the beaver, the maple leaf, one of the earliest registered Canadian trademarks, registered as Canada was becoming a country. I said, Florian, if I can't get the trademark back, then we should probably call it a day. She goes, okay. She was smarter than I give her credit for. So back to the lawyers. And I said, I'd like to get my trademark back. And they said, well, you can't. And I said, why not? And they said, well, we also act for Canadian Pacific Railways. And I didn't realize it at the time, but if you don't continue to use a trademark, two things happen. Somebody else can start. And if you don't object, you effectively lose the right to the trademark. So they said, we act for Canadian Pacific Railways, and their trademark is very close to what you have. On their rolling stock, it's a beaver and a maple leaf. Now, the beaver's sitting on top of the maple leaf, but it's close enough that we will tell Canadian Pacific Railways that we will object and you can't have it back. I said, well, who are you working for here? Well, we have this Chinese wall. I said, it doesn't sound very Chinese to me. You're working for them. I said, give me the name of the guy who's running Canadian Pacific. And there was a lot of the hand over the whole. I said, no, just, who is it? Anyway, I found out, called him. He put me on hold, said, I'll call you back. I'm just going to get my chief legal officer. Guy calls me back. Same thing. What's the story? What is it you're doing? I tell him. And they go, you know what? We think it's a great idea. We're about to change our trademark on our rolling stock, on our railway cars, to a semicircle and a triangle. We haven't used the beaver and the maple leaf for years, but what a great story. Go ahead. You can have the trademark back. So I'm screwed now. I have absolutely no reason not to do the brewery, except I needed a whole bunch of money. And Florian's going, well, you're running out of excuses here. I said, have you got any money? She goes, no, that's not my job. My job is to wait 50 years. Here's the book. Here's the bottle. You've done everything else. All you got to do is find some money, which was not quite as easy as I expected. Plus, I didn't know how to build a brewery. I didn't know how to run a brewery. So I happened to be the agent. It's funny how things kind of coalesce over the years. I happened to be the agent for the Stroh Brewing Company. I was importing their products. And so I called Peter Stroh and I said, this crazy idea. Can I come and see you? I want to talk about building a brewery. And he goes, sure, come and see me. So I drive down the 401. I get a speeding ticket. I take the wrong turn coming out of the tunnel. I'm 2 hours late for the meeting. Everybody's gone home except for Peter. I finally get there and I tell him the story. And he goes, well, what do you want? I said, well, I need a certain amount of money. And I don't have any brands. People haven't heard of Sleeman beer since 1933, but they have heard of Schlitz and Pabst Blue Ribbon and Stroh's and all these other brands. So I said, I'd like to build a brewery and I need you to let me make your beer and sell it so people will recognize the brands. And oh, by the way, I don't have a brewmaster and I don't have any engineers and I need some of your money. I thought, you talk about Napkin. I literally had on the back of an envelope, 8 things I needed to ask Peter Stroh for. And I go back to my comment in our last interview about you don't ask, you don't get. And there were 2 people left out of all of the other people that were supposed to be at the meeting. Peter Stroh had a couple of guys with him, one who was a Canadian. And I do my pitch, just like you and I are talking. It wasn't a slick, woolly kind of, here's a handout. It was, hey, what do you think of this idea? I'm thinking of doing this. I brought him the recipe book. Peter Stroh says, I kind of like this idea. I think it's pretty good. And his finance guys are going, are you out of your mind? He's going to go bankrupt. Peter says, okay, I'll put money into the equivalent of 19% because at 20% you have to declare it and put it on your books and all of that kind of stuff. But at 19.9%, there's no cross-border declaration or income tax or anything. He goes, so you said you needed some people. What do you need? I said, well, I need a brewmaster. He goes, I'll find you a brewmaster. He said, what else do you need? I said, well, I don't have any engineers. He goes, well, I got 38 engineers on staff. I'll give you a couple. What else do you need? I said, well, I could use a finance guy. He goes, okay, I'll send a guy up. So I'm just sitting there talking to him, going through my list. And he goes, okay, I guess we got it. He goes, but I'm going to tell you something. We're going to set this up. I'm giving you everything you've asked for. But if you ever run out of money, don't call me. Like, this is it. I'll give you people to help you get going. I'll give you brands to help you get success in the marketplace and recognition. But if you don't manage this business well enough and you run out of money, I'm not there for you. And his guys are going, yeah, you're going to go bankrupt. And I said, well, what if I go bankrupt? He goes, I lose my money. This is him saying to me, Peter Stroh goes, I guess I lose my money, but I'm not putting, good money after bad or bad money after good, whatever the expression is. So I left there going, well, that seems to have gone rather well. I come back to Canada and sure enough, he sends me up one of his heads of brewing, who was a Canadian guy that used to work for Labatt's, came up and he said, I know a guy who will work for you. He just took an early retirement from Labatt's as a brewmaster. We used to work together. So in one fell swoop, I've got, 20 engineers or something, a Canadian brewmaster with international experience for 50 years, a bunch of brands that I can make out of the gate that people actually have heard of, people who know how to build a place and make beer. And I remember on my way out talking to Peter going, when this is a success, how would you feel about selling Sleeman beer in the Detroit area? He goes, sure. So years later, we're selling beer in Detroit. We're making beer for them up here. And it goes back to Florian giving me this stuff. It goes back to sitting across from Peter Stroh. And we didn't have emails in those days, for Christ's sake. It was all faxes and phone calls and letters. But it was driving down the 401 and sitting there, watching how he reacted when I said, I have this idea. See, if I hadn't been there and the letter says, I have this idea, he'd go, this guy's nuts. But you know what? You give somebody the recipe book, you tell them the story, you show them the bottle, they look in the whites of your eyes, they go, guy might be crazy, but he might just get this done.
But that happened over and over again, right? It happened. With what business does CN have turning away from a trademark? Like, Like what business does like all of this? These are major companies. Just like when you crossed the ocean, you slept on the floor, cold called the major breweries to bring their brew back here. It was the same thing again.
Yes, but you know what the key is? They didn't have as much to lose as I did. So Guinness sends a container load and it doesn't work. Oh, they're out $10,000. Peter Stroh puts money into a brewery and he loses it. He's out a few million, but 3 or 4 million for him. That's the marketing budget for the city of Detroit's for Stroh's fire brewed beer. It's a big deal for me if I lose it. The key is, how do I make it not a big deal for the person on the other side of the table? So they go, like you said about Americans, hey, why not? What have I got to lose? So when I would go and propose stuff to people, I always tried to put myself in their shoes. Like, if this goes terribly bad for you, are you out of business? Are you embarrassed in the public? What's the worst thing that can happen to you if this doesn't work out?
So this is really important, right? So this is really and it started with your Aunt Florian giving you this gift, right? You better do something with it. It's almost like you have over and over again. You did this with the bringing the beer here, and you did it with launching the brewery here. After you were given the gift, it's really being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes to understand what could be important to them.
Yeah, that's very important. And our company does it. Our family has done it. Put yourself in the other person's shoes in this conversation. Are they going to be embarrassed? Are they going to be humiliated? Are they going to feel like you're not respecting them? Try and figure out what's going through their minds. If you want to make a deal with them, it can't be win-lose.
Right.
You have to say, I know you'd be concerned about X, Y, Z, and here's what I'm going to do to make this even easier for you to not have to go through that.
So I know you had that practice. You talked about it in part one, the practice of speaking in front of people and being open, not BSing your way through it. You have to, come prepared and come as you are. Yep. And you brought that practice forward to this. Now you got the okays. People said yes. Peter Stroh said yes. So now you actually have to do it again. You don't know anything about building a brewery.
I know.
I mean, you figured out nitrogen and making the creamy head of a Guinness beer, but this is a big departure.
No, it's a little different. It's a little different building a brewery. I look back on it and I go, you know what? I'm not sure I ever sat down and thought about the enormity of the project, nor did I ascribe much to the risk of failure, because I was in my 20s and 30s. And I went, like I said in our previous conversation, if things don't go well, I get up tomorrow morning and I go flip burgers at McDonald's and I start all over again. We don't have debtors' prisons. They don't take you out and shoot you in the parking lot. It's a little embarrassing if you fail, but you start all over again. It's not a big deal. Just get out there and get it done.
One of the things that I think is amazing, and I think people need to sit into this for a second, is you hit pause. A lot of times, I hear this a lot, where people were doing something. We're doing something great, maybe. I mean, heck, when Paper Napkin Wisdom started, I started, and we were higher up the charts than some of the biggest podcasts that are out there today. We were there before. We were there in some of the biggest podcasts, but we paused for 6 years. And part of it was like, why should I come back? All these other people have come and lapped us. Beyond that, you had that. Mine was 6 years. Yours was 73 years from the time that in 1911, there were either 11 or $13 million in the bank. The other companies that were part of that cartel agreement not only kept that money, but built on it, to billion-dollar entities. And and I just want to go back. 1984, 1985, this cool craft brew industry that exists on both sides of the board wasn't there. Yeah, it wasn't this big thing. And so in 1984, 95, you're starting off with zero, nothing other than a great book, amazing story. You got a logo back, fantastic,
but the logo's not worth anything unless you're selling something.
Yeah.
And all your competitors have had 73 years of building.
Mhm.
Right? So now I want to take that on one side, but the other side of it is you've got this like, so what? I fail. Big deal.
Yeah.
No big deal. I think that that's a very unique thing, right? Some people, when they stop doing something, or when the family stop, when the opportunity was missed, sit around, they sit on their hands, they feel really badly for themselves that they didn't start it at the right time, or they didn't do something at the right time. That never dissuaded you.
No, I mean, people quite often, in my experience, will look for reasons not to take a risk. And I think it goes back to them perhaps being afraid of failure or humiliation. But to be honest, I have a lot to be thankful for. I was in the right place at the right time. Not long before I went to see Peter Stroh, there was a beer strike in Ontario, and I'm importing beer. I'm the only guy importing beer. In 3 weeks, I made an awful lot of money, like $750,000. So when I have the recipe book going, how am I going to start the brewery? I suddenly have a bunch of cash sitting here because the right place at the right time with the brands and an arrangement with the people at the LCBO. Anytime they asked for something, we found a way to do it, and I never embarrassed them. I always lived up to my commitments. There were never any bad debts. If the consumers had issues, they came to me. They didn't go to the LCBO. So they would go. I remember going to them and saying, I know this is a little cheeky, but do you think we could work on some kind of deal where if someone decides they want a special imported keg beer from Germany or someplace, you go, yeah, we have somebody who does that, as opposed to saying, why don't you start your own company? I said, do you think we could have a little kind of monopoly thing here? And they said, well, we're not supposed to do that. I said, yeah, I know you're not, but do you want to deal with 8 of us, or do you just want to deal with one? Well, Christ, let's just deal with one. So along comes the beer strike. There's only one guy in the province who can bring in draft beer. And the strike was, the rules were written, if you weren't already importing beer before the strike, you can't show up today and say, oh, I'd like to import beer. What you say is, oh, we have a guy who does that.
Yeah.
So here's a beer strike that lasts 3 weeks. And I'm in the right place at the right time with the relationships with the suppliers and the LCBO. I ran out of Guinness, and it takes another 4 weeks to get another bunch of Guinness. But because of Peter Stroh, I pick the phone up every night and go, Peter, I need another 2 tractor trailers tomorrow, past Blue Ribbon. It'd be there.
And that wasn't bad for him either.
He didn't mind at all.
No.
He was the 3rd largest brewing company in the United States, and he became the largest seller of beer in the province of Ontario for 3 weeks. Pabst Blue Ribbon was, you know what? There's a great bar. I don't even know if it's still downtown. In downtown Toronto, it used to be called the Brunswick House. And they were a huge account for draft. And so many people were renting trucks and driving to our place in Mississauga. There were no trucks to be rented. So I come to work in the morning, and there's literally down the street and around the corner trucks waiting for us to open our door and unload the 3 or 4 tractor trailers that came from Detroit overnight. And Canada Customs said, you got to land them in your warehouse. And then eventually he said, this is stupid. So we would just back people up with their trucks and off the tractor trailer and the money. And I came to work one day, there's a friggin' bus from the city of Toronto Transit in the lineup. And I'm going, guy's in the wrong place. Anyway, so I walk out to the street and I kind of knock on the door. The guy's asleep. And I said, this is a lineup for beer, eh? He goes, yeah, I'm from the Brunswick House. We couldn't get a truck. I'm going to fill this TTC bus with Pabst Blue Ribbon.
It doesn't even sound real.
So,
like the story doesn't even sound real.
Yes, but it's so cool because I work in a business I did then and I do now that people get excited about. If I was making door hinges, people wouldn't be lining up with the City of Toronto bus to buy another box of door hinges. But there's something passionate about beer, which is what I recognized in our very first conversation about sitting in a pub in England. People love pubs. They love beer. They love whiskey. And they get passionate about it. And they have brands they follow. They're terribly brand loyal. Look at the conversation you and I have been having about Guinness. Once you get introduced to that, you're a Guinness. Most people, once they have a Guinness, they go, oh, I'm a Guinness guy for life. So to see a guy sitting in a Toronto Transit Commission bus because his customers love our beer. You go home at night and you tell people that there at work today, there were piles of 20s and piles, because in those days you couldn't pay with credit. If you wanted to buy alcohol in this province, it was cash. I don't even think you couldn't use a credit card. So we had a Brinks guy, and he'd come and he'd take the cash away in green garbage bags at night. And we had ladies sitting there counting. We'd take the money to the bank, and the TD Bank at Iroquois Shores in Trafalgar in Oakville charged me for one of those machines where you feed the money in and it counts it. And they went, we don't, drug dealer? I said, no, I'm selling beer. I said, well, we don't know how to handle all this cash. So they went and bought a machine, and then they had the cheek to charge me for the bloody machine. So, you go back to, I've been very lucky about being in the right place at the right time. But to your question in our earlier interview, there is a certain element of, well, I guess I better take this opportunity because I don't know if it's going to present itself again.
I look, luck plays a role because timing, we don't get to control time, but you have to be there. You have to be ready. You have to have done the preparation. You have to have the infrastructure. You have to have you have to have the machine running in a certain direction, and you have to have the vision for what it could be. You didn't know how you were going to sell all this stuff, but you knew that you could, right? Yeah. And you had that unshakable belief.
Selling it is tomorrow's problem. I got to get it here today.
Right.
And I got to figure out how to make it legal and make sure everybody's happy. Have I solved all today's problems? Great. Okay. Tomorrow's problem is you got a warehouse full of beer. How are you going to sell it?
So the Johns got together and wrote a cartel agreement. When you showed that to the Molsons and the Labatts, when you wanted to open up again, I'm pretty sure they didn't honor it.
No. Well, plus it was illegal. But
there's that little thing. There's that.
But no, one of the interesting things is because nobody knew my last name, nobody had any idea of any success I might have had. So they just thought, here's another guy who wants to open a little brewery. Let him blow his brains out. He's not going to impact my business at all. So for many years, Sleeman just flew under the radar. It was very convenient.
So they just thought you were.
Well, they were so busy competing with each other. Molson with Labatt and Carling, all fighting. I'm just kind of going, you guys get on with it. And I'm just going to quietly, people who work with me, we're going to quietly come up and we'll pick off this account. We'll pick off that account. We'll have really cool bottles because you want to have your bottling line run really efficiently, which means you all have the same brown bottle and a paper label. Well, you know what? I don't need to be that efficient. I have no money for marketing. So I'm going to take my Aunt Florian's bottle, but I'm going to make it clear instead of brown. So when you walk in a bar and you look down the bar, you're going to see a clear bottle. This is before the days of Corona. So how do I get people's attention? Because you get people to try something in a bar and then they buy 24 to go home. Doesn't work the other way around. So if you're walking in a bar and you see a guy drinking beer out of a bottle that's clear and has no label, chances are you're going to go, what the hell's that? So by doing that, we were able to take market share from Molson, Labatt, and Carling's before they even knew they lost any market share. And our market share, I remember at the brewery, we had a hell of a party when we got 1% market share. We used to get the announcement once a week about market share, and we were desperate to become a one-share player. And Molson, Labatt care about losing one share to the other guy, but they didn't even notice that one share disappeared out the back.
It's like that old Superman movie when the character carves off a fraction of a cent and piles up millions of dollars in doing so. It's like that, you just carved off this fraction of a cent, this fraction of a share from all these players until you all of a sudden became big enough. Until you was like, oh, there they are. It's almost though what you did with Guinness and all the other UK brands that you brought across the country. Now you had to do for yourself, but you didn't have Guinness. You didn't have the brand recognition. So how'd you get in? Like, how did that work?
Well, that's why I wanted to talk to Peter Stroh, hey, Peter, I may have a recipe book and this great history and smuggling and all that stuff. I don't have the money to tell anybody that story, but I have to get people to drink so I can keep the lights on. And they will know your brands. And so what we did is we got the rights to produce Peter Stroh's brands and put them on the shelves. And I was fortunate enough that people were already aware of those brands because they were being imported. They didn't have to learn about Old Milwaukee and all of those brands because they were on the liquor board shelves as an imported product. So on a Monday morning, they stopped being imported and they became made in Guelph. And so the customer went in and it tasted the same and it looked the same, except I got the money instead of Peter Stroh.
Yeah.
And so we built those brands because I needed the customer familiarity and their loyalty. And then we'd introduce, oh, why don't you try this brand? It's got an interesting story called Sleeman. And then it started to take off and we started running into problems. We couldn't get enough bottles made. And people were driving from beer store to beer store going, have you got any cream ale? Have you got, So nothing happens overnight.
Did you, there's a whole bunch of marketing stuff around the tipping point, right? There's a tipping point where you get to a point of the market consciousness where they start to understand and hear about you, and that demand pulls and it becomes a cascade of action. Did you notice that tipping point, or did it just happen? Did it happen around you, or did it never happen? It was always little pieces all along.
Yeah. I would say that it happened a little bit at a time. I mean, it happens to me when I drive up the Hanlon Parkway here in Guelph, and I look at the brewery and I go, where the hell did that come from? It's like watching your kids grow up. It's not until you see a picture of your kids when they were babies and you're now sitting around the boardroom table with them and you go, wow, how did you get here? It's incremental every year. And with the beer business, our beer business, I mean, we didn't inherit anything other than the bottle and the recipe book. So it's not like I show up for work and the brewery's been here for 200 years and the role is just don't screw it up. We had to start. But every day you overcome. In our last conversation, we talked about what do you do when problems come up every day? There's no when or if. It is every day there's problems. And you're so busy dealing with these things, plus doing some strategic planning and trying to execute and have the right people in the right places to do the right jobs. And then you wake up one day and you go, holy smokes, we got like 12% market share. How did that happen? Well, it was 11% before, and then it was 10% before. And you just build on the business. And that's what we're doing here at the distillery. It's been a long haul, but we're getting to the point where we're seeing some momentum.
John, it's amazing that you said that about driving past the brewery, because on my way into town, I drove up the 6 and I saw a Sleeman's truck parked off the side of the road, a big truck. And the sign was there. Your name was emblazoned on this thing. And a sense of like immense pride came over me because I was coming to speak to John Sleeman, right? John, I get to talk to that guy today.
And now you realize it's no big deal.
It's a huge
no, really,
deal.
I'm just a working guy like everybody else.
Yeah, but
people have this image of me that isn't true.
Well, I'm going to get to that in a second. But the thing that the second thought. So the first thought was, wow, I feel this. The second thing was, what does John feel when he sees that? What does that look like? Because not a lot of people have made that kind of impact in their lifetime, where they've taken a brand that is their name and brought it back to something that it was maybe better than it was. Oh, better, definitely, because you're smuggling alcohol to Al Capone anymore.
Yeah, right? More's the pity.
So what does that feel like?
I never
think about it. Never think about
it. If I'm remember when you and I were chatting at the Ottawa Whiskey Show. Sometimes I will say to people, if they go, I've never heard of this brand, or what is this about? I will say, have you ever heard of Sleeman Breweries or Sleeman Beer? And usually they'll go, oh yeah. Well, what do you have to do with this? I said, well, and I will say at that point, well, I'm John Sleeman and I'm working with my sons in the distillery. And then usually they go, oh, well, that's kind of cool that you're working with your boys or whatever the conversation is. But our family has never made a habit of walking around telling people what our last name is. You know, you can ask the boys. People will say to me, what do you do for a living? I work at a brewery. Oh, yeah, which one? Sleeman. Oh, that's pretty cool. What do you do there? well, I'm kind of management or I'm sales. So I drive up to Hanlon and I look at the place, and if I'm not late for a meeting and speeding, I take a second and look at the place and I go, wow, that's pretty cool that we've done this. Florian would be pleased, I hope. But I don't think about seeing my name on stuff. Sometimes I'll travel with the boys. We'll get off the plane, and we were talking about this before. I'll go to the car rental place and we'll go, Sleeman, like the beer? And it's like they all went to school and they asked the same question because the same teacher told them. It's always, Sleeman, like the beer? Yeah. Oh, I love your honey brown. And that makes me happy because we're doing something that people like. Right. And they're very loyal and they're proud about it. I mean, people will say, oh yeah, I used to drink. Cooper will sometimes say that when he was underage, and I'm so proud of him, he'd go to a bush party and bring out cream ale. And his friends said, wow, that's pretty cool beer. What are you doing drinking that stuff? So, and people have this loyalty years and years later. Like you said about going in the Algonquin and a canoeing trip, and you're dreaming about a honey brown. I don't know how we got there, except every day you get up and you work hard and you have the basic principles of what you will and won't do. And there's family integrity, there's quality of product. How do you advertise? I mean, it's a consumer product. So we have to put our minds in the consumer. Like you and I were talking, what does the other person expect from this experience? Well, they don't want to be embarrassed by holding the bottle up. And when they do this, it bloody well better taste good. And if it doesn't, then you better have a way to fix that problem. So if you have consumer complaints, you're right, I'm wrong, we'll fix it. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into Sleeman being 35 or 40 years old.
But wait, I think it goes back to your napkin for this segment, right? You've been given a gift. You look at this as a gift. Oh, and you're doing something with that gift. And I think that, there are some people who are falsely humble about what they've achieved, but that's not what's coming across. You have this calling, this family calling, but this calling to do this work, to give joy to the people who enjoy this with you.
Well, I wish I could ascribe that.
No, I don't mean it that way, but I mean that. I think that you take great pride in that part of it.
Yeah, no. As we said at the beginning of this conversation, I think I was very lucky to be given something. And what do? Do you squander it? My aunt would not be pleased if she knew, A, I didn't do anything about it, or I did it badly, or I embarrassed the family. I mean, one of the things that was a real big deal for her was she needed to get over the embarrassment of our family getting caught smuggling. She needed to fix that. So our history it ended when we got caught smuggling. And I remember conversations in the family about how much do we want to talk about the fact we got caught smuggling. And I said to my dad, who was usually very upset about it, and Florian not so much, listen, if we don't get out and talk about this, one of our competitors will. And instead of it being a fun story about Al Capone, it's going to be, Al Capone murdered people, and your people over there, you worked with him. So I said, we got to control the narrative here. And I need to make sure that I do, and my sons do, and anybody else who works in any of our family businesses, we acknowledge what we did in the past and we improve on it.
And that's the integrity.
That's the integrity.
That's the integrity of it all, right? Yeah. It's almost like with your story and the way that you approached it. You said, ask for forgiveness rather than permission. You did that up front.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much there. And when you're thinking about that, did Florian ever see?
Yeah. She lived long enough to come to the brewery. It was not close to the size it is now. But it was really quite something just to watch her face, Yeah. It was nice.
So thinking about that legacy, thinking about what you stand for, now at this stage, and all of the people and all that you've brought along with you in doing this, it doesn't feel like you're building to sell. Like that's the whole thing, right? Everybody's building everything to sell it, right? It doesn't sound like that's what you're doing.
Not us. I mean, I hoped that some or all of my children would want to be involved in the family business, but to my recollection, maybe I used some moral suasion, but at no point did I ever say you have no choice but to work in the family business. My oldest daughter has her own medical profession, and my youngest daughter is a teacher, and they have not expressed any interest to being in this business. The boys have grown up. This is what you hear morning, noon, and night. But I don't think I ever said to them, you have to work in it. But I'm lucky they did, because I didn't want to build a business that I would sell. I wanted to build a business. I kind of, you know what I feel like? This is a 5 or 6 or 7 generation business, and we had 1 generation of holiday. My job is get this thing back on the rails and leave it better than you found it, and make sure the next generation goes, I know my job, leave it better than I found it.
Do you feel, do you let yourself sort of look back at it and see that, you know, you've picked up the torch and done well with it? Or are you too more focused on where else you want to go with it?
I'm certainly focused on the future. Every once in a while, like I said, I drive up the Hanlon and go, where the hell did this place come from? I guess you did okay. Yeah. And then I say, don't get a big head about this. There's a hell of a lot of people that helped you get here. It's not just you. And so, you know, one of the reasons I think our businesses have been a success is I kind of think my job is to come up with the ideas and lay the groundwork, and then hire a bunch of people who are smarter than me to execute. Because I like to think that I think of everything. I don't think of everything. And I remember my very first business, this pub in Oakville, and my first accountant, who was the best man at my wedding, I was bitching about something. He said, and it had to do with me wanting 100% control and needing more money. And he goes, you know, you can own 100% of a bankrupt company, or you can surround yourself with good investors and good management people and own 51% of a $1 billion company. What would you like? And so, you know what? We talk about napkin notes and stuff. I've had a tremendous benefit from people who sat me down and just helped me stay on the straight and narrow.
You listen, and that's the
I
gift.
try to.
You keep on getting, and you do something with it.
Yeah.
And you do something. John, I can't wait for part 3. If you're listening, we've got something special in store for part 3. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
What an incredible chapter in this 3-part journey with John Sleeman. Today, we weren't just talking about business. We were talking about destiny, about legacy, about what happens when a forgotten past knocks on your door and hands you a handwritten recipe for your future. John reminded us of something powerful. Legacy can arrive when you least expect it, and you have to be ready to receive it. You have to be open to receiving it. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when you're lying in bed wondering, am I out of my mind? The past can guide you, but it's your action that brings it back to life. So, what did this episode stir in you? Have you been given something, a story, a moment, a spark of inspiration? Are you ready to do something with it? If this episode hit home for you, I'd love you to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us reach more leaders just like you. And if you're feeling especially moved, here's your challenge. Grab a napkin and write down your biggest takeaway from this episode. Snap a photo and post it using the hashtag #PaperNapkinWisdom. What gift have you been given that you've been waiting too long to act on? And what's your first step forward? Remember, wisdom doesn't come from hearing. It comes from doing. You've been given a gift. Better do something with it. I'm Govind Jayaraman, and this has been Paper Napkin Wisdom. You don't want to miss part 3 in this series, episode 250, coming up next. We've got some extra special, extra guests. Make it a great day.